paraphrase Mark Twain, a gentleman is somebody who knows how to play the ukulele, but doesn't. I'm Ian Simmons. I'm Science Communication Director at the Centre for Life. This evening I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I ended up doing this. I'd like to say I started the Norfolk Flea Collection from scratch, but that wouldn't be entirely true. Back in 1982, I graduated with a degree in biology, just as Thatcherism was starting to bite, and it was the worst year for graduate employment ever. So instead of having a job, I found myself in a damp cottage in Norwich with a bunch of other people in similar situations, one of whom was a guy called Glenn. Now, Glenn had first come to my attention when him and some pals were pouring powdered cement over each other and jumping in the university pond. He had a kind of skinhead haircut with badger stripes dyed in it, and when he graduated, he'd taken with him quite a lot of the glassware from the chemistry department, and over the preceding months had spent time crafting these into really elaborate water-cooled bombs. He set these up in our sitting room and invited his friends round. Now, his main group of friends at that time were a bunch of guys called the Gypsy Warlords, who were Great Yarmouth biker gang. They had their own in-house undertaker. Most mornings, I'd be woken by these guys roaring up outside, parking their choppers on the grass verge, and then they'd come in, they'd sit in the front room, and they'd smoke really strong dope through these chemistry apparatus bongs in front of the really big window that fronted straight onto the street and all our neighbours. And it's quite a posh neighbourhood. We were kind of the scruffy guys in the posh street. They'd walk straight past the window and look in, and it was full of bikers smoking dope. It was a bit like being an episode of The Young Ones, scripted by Hunter S. Thompson, but with Penelope Keith living next door. All these people had dogs, and the dogs hated the bikers. They'd bark at them every time the bikes pulled up. And the bikers hated the dogs for doing it and drawing attention to them, as if they needed attention drawing to themselves. Anyway, one morning I get up at about 11 o'clock as usual and stagger downstairs to have breakfast, and I'm in the kitchen, or I go into the kitchen, and I'm confronted by the sight of Glenn and a couple of these bikers, and they finally got tired of these damn dogs and kidnapped next door's white Scotty dog, and they've got this dog in the sink. And they're dyeing it fluorescent green with crazy. I sort of take one bleary look at them and think, Christ, I need to get out more. So one of the other guys in the house we hardly ever see because he's off volunteering at the Castle Museum in the art history department. And I think, they've got a natural history department, I've got a biology degree, perhaps they might find me useful. So I trundle off up to the museum and I see the curator, and as I've got a biology degree, I'm not obviously mentally unstable, and I don't smell of alcohol. They kind of say, yeah, come on. I'm sure we can find some stuff for you to do, and indeed they do. There's about a year's backlog of washing up in the lab sink, so I get to do that. I get to fumigate the butterflies. I get to sniff the spirit collection. This is important, because when people preserve things in spirit, sometimes they get to it a bit late, or they forget to put spirit in, there's only water in, the stuff goes off, so you have to find it and go around sniffing the jars. And I also boiled a wolverine, one I killed over at Norfolk Wildlife Park, and we were making a skeleton preparation of it, and I got the job of cooking it down. So after a few weeks of this kind of thing, and I haven't gone away, because if I do, I'm back in the damp cottage with the crazed bikers dying dogs and smoking dope. They think, yeah, he's going to stay around for a bit, so they find me a project. The curator of the Natural History Department in Norwich Castle Museum was quite into ectoparasites, so skin parasites and so on and so forth. When I'd started, he was sleeping in the spare room at home because his wife wouldn't let him share their bed because he got some really interesting ticks that he was breeding up under a little plastic dome sellotape to his stomach. And what he had got was 30 years backlog of fleas. Every time somebody collected some fleas, they put them in little tiny tubes with a cork in the top, and then dropped these tubes in big sweet jars, and there's about 5 of these in the store, and they needed somebody to sort these out, to mount them on slides and label them all up, and I got the job. They gave me this book, Handbook for the Identification of British Insects, Siphonaptera, and these jars. So I sit down and I set to, and I got lots of potassium hydroxide. You have to dip the fleas in the potassium hydroxide to clear their integuments, because one of the important things that you have to see on a flea, here's a flea, what you have to look at to identify fleas are two main things. One is the sort of hairy bits on the head and the bits around there and the pronotum there, but the main thing is the genitals. These are flea genitals. As you can see, they're pretty complicated. So I was spending 6 months looking at flea genitals. It was great. I loved it. I was sitting there staring at the microscope all day. Nobody bothered me. I got really into it. I could pretty much do it without the key in the end. Totally absorbed. I thought, this is marvellous. I want to do this for a career. I want to work in museums, and I want to be an entomologist. I want to stare at fleas for the rest of my life. It sounds like it could be quite boring, but there were moments of excitement. I closed down the entire county council post room for about a week, because whilst I was doing this, I was trying to get up-to-date information on fleas. Occasionally someone would turn up with a shovel with a bunch of rats on it and upset the receptionist, but mostly because there's fleas are really, really common on birds. There's lots and lots of different kinds of bird fleas, and you get them by looking in their nests. So I got lots of naturalists to post me birds' nests in sealed plastic bags, which was fine. The post room opened the packages, and then they'd send the bags up to me. This was okay until somebody chose to recycle a bread bag to keep their bird's nest in. Now, bread bags have holes in, so you don't suffocate if you put them over your head. They're also just the right size to let fleas out. So the fleas got out, the fleas infested the post room got closed down, and I was really unpopular because nobody got their mail for a week. But I didn't let this disturb me too much, and I trundled along until we got an art student come to draw dragonflies. She came along, she sat opposite me on the bench in the lab, and had a whole bunch of dragonflies out there, was sketching them. I was sitting there staring down my microscope. We were chatting whilst I looked down, and she was saying after about 5-10 minutes, "Oh, and what are you doing?" And I went, "Oh, I'm sorting the flea collection." And sort of, and kind of silence. And yeah, I thought, that's not gone down too well, has it? And so I just get on with doing things until a few minutes later, I need to adjust the focus on my microscope. Fortunately, my left hand. Now, there's a small problem with my left hand at this point, because as well as ticks and fleas, we had leeches in the department, and these were not preserved leeches. We had a live culture of medicinal leeches, which are quite rare, and so we had these going on and keeping them alive, and every few months somebody had to feed them, and I volunteered to feed the leeches. So I actually had a pack of leeches on the back of my hand feeding them, and as I reached up to turn the microscope focus, that's what the book looks like inside. That's the diagram of the flea bits. But it looked like that. So I reach up and I turn the dial, and the poor woman opposite goes, "Oh my God, what's that on your hand?" And without looking up from the microscope, I say, "Oh, I'm just feeding the leeches." There is a more profound silence, followed by a crash. And I look up, and the art student's nowhere to be seen. She's fainted, fallen off her stool, and smacked her head on the fridge on the way down. So I have to get somebody to call an ambulance and fill in lots of health and safety forms, and shortly afterwards I left the Castle Museum. Not due to this, but because I'd managed to get a proper job in the neighbouring museum, where I took over the Suffolk Biological Records Centre, because my predecessor had been fired after a conviction for dishonestly handling a stuffed squirrel. My career was on its way, and 25 years later, here I am in Newcastle. Thank you very much.
the art student who fainted we're going to get married. We fell in love, and with this leech, Ivy
I
Wade.
married one of my friends.
He married one of her friends, that's good, he's just told me. Oh! So sort of, what, it's like Love Actually, isn't it? Yes, almost exactly the same. Yes, I feel the need for another Christmas sing. I don't know about you.
Yeah!
Yeah, thank you, man in the front.